So we're going to get back in position to continue this really informative session with the great set of panelists. Deborah, you reminded all of us trust but verify. So thank you for that wonderful, wonderful reminder. I want to open it up to questions, but before I do, Katie, tell us from a practical implementer's perspective, you did a survey of the top 20 federal government websites. What are some of the key findings and some practical tips for people to really get going with the 508 beyond what Robert and Dominic and John have offered? Okay?
Yeah, now I'm on here. Hi, folks. Thank you for coming. One thing I do want to say really quickly is I feel extremely fortunate that I'm a person who was able to initially work on the standards at the end of WCAG 1 and then throughout WCAG 2 and now what we're moving on to. And at that same time, I came into the government and Helen welcomed me in as one of the first Section 508 coordinators. So not only was I able to be involved in the development of the standards that the requirements for the world has used and now the federal government in the United States will be using, and then implementing those standards in the federal government, getting some lessons learned over the years about what we thought, what we didn't think, what worked well, what didn't work well, the revamping of the standards, the recommendations that came in 2006 to 2008 for the refresh. Over time, watching technologies change, watching sort of how well WCAG 2 stood up, because in building WCAG 2, we did try very, very hard to ensure that it was technology agnostic as much as possible, that it would live longer than WCAG 1, which was very technology specific. And I think that it's sort of stood the test of time and continues to be an extremely useful standard and will stay so for a long time. We've been talking about best practices, and so WCAG has 3 levels, A, AA, and AAA. And so the standard and the law in the United States is AA, which means everything in single A and everything in AA. So AAA, which no one talks about, is actually the innovation and the best practices. I was noticing Microsoft was talking yesterday about their learning tool and how their learning tool was backed up by all this research and stuff, and it's great. When I look at the real history, back when those particular success criteria were being recommended, Microsoft and multiple other companies were saying, oh no, that can't be a AA or a single A, that has to be a AAA because that's impossible. And now they're using the impossible to do what is possible. And it was because cognitive issues were extremely hard to cover first time around. And the Access Board has decided to take that head on. Because companies like Microsoft have taken those AAA success criteria and turned them into these great tools that help everybody, but it was such a hard sell. Oh my gosh, it was such a hard sell. And so this is the innovation over time. So I want you to keep that in your heads when you have this minimum standard that you're going to be pointing to, which is going to seem really different and maybe a little bit harder than what you were doing before, WCAG 2, level AA. When you want to start thinking about best practices, go ahead, please look at the AAAs as well. No one will be able to sue you over not doing them.
To the ceiling that
That's right.
Deborah
That's
was
right.
talking
That's
about,
right.
not just the floor.
Don't just do the minimum.
Yep.
You have to do the minimum now, but just think about that for your best practices and your innovation, because Microsoft took that and ran, and I was thrilled to see all that. I was not thrilled to hear that it wasn't a AAA, that it was Microsoft. It said research, didn't say Microsoft research, but I got it, so just a kick to Microsoft to say, please, acknowledge the pieces of it that came from WCAG. And so let's go with we did a survey. I want to get to the data a little bit, the data that you were talking about that everyone needs, because it is the data that makes people, upper management, make the decision to make changes. Where do we focus our resources? Where do we have our problems? And so Deque did a quick survey of those top 20 sites from analytics.gov. If you go there right now, analytics.gov will give you the top 20 sites, the traffic into those sites today, the last 7 days, the last 30 days. It will talk about what kind of devices people have been coming into us into the government as, which browsers they're using, which operating systems they're using. Things are not surprising. Of course, most people are still on Windows, but almost 40% are people who are coming in mobile, 30-something on phones, and tablets. The combined is about 40%. So that's a huge point. Obviously, everyone knows this, but I want you to keep in mind that this is was a really great idea that Preeti had to let's look at those and get some ideas about where they stand based on testing with an automated tool. And we all know that automated tools only test for particular things, right? There's lots of things in accessibility that have to be tested in a different way. But there's a whole lot of information and data that you can get from errors that come from an automated tool. So we took Deque's automated tool, obviously, Axe. It's a free tool anyone can use. It runs in a browser. And ran errors against the prior Section 508 and WCAG 2 and compared them. And this is, I'm not going to go through it because we don't have the time, so I'm not going to do the presentation and show you the data, but I'm just going to say that there were about 2/3 more errors than were there before. Some of the highest errors were obviously in contrast, and this is something that's covered in WCAG that was not covered in the original standards. And some very basic things like that. Alt text is still a problem. Form labels is still a problem. And so by having these metrics, by doing these tests, you can see the pieces and the areas that need to work on. Some agencies did great, and some agencies didn't do so well. And we wanted to always anonymize everything that we found, but it was just a sort of a measure. I'll show one thing real quick. This has nobody's name, site A through O, Q. And the yellow, so this is a...
Wait, Katie, where are you showing this?
Oh, thank you. All this stuff I'm not going to talk about. That was the analytic. These are the errors. Some of them are must, some of them are maze. But let's go with... All right, this particular table shows... It's a graph. And it shows site... And it was filtered to take the least problems up to the highest problems. And so Site A has just Section 508 errors and no WCAG errors. And Site Q has the most errors. And the yellow is the old Section 5, original Section 508 is what Bruce has told me to talk about. The Section 508 refresh errors are the blue ones.
Yeah, we've changed the phrasing that we're trying to get people to use, because for what 10 years now we've been talking about the ICT refresh or the 508 refresh, and now we've decided, well, that's no good because we're there. So when Tim, my colleague who's in the audience here, Tim and I speak about the 508 requirements, we'll try and say original 508 standards and revised 508 standards. So this is wrong, Katie, but that's okay.
Okay, sorry. Okay, well, anyway, the
vocabulary is important. We'll change that.
Revised 508 standards.
Okay.
And so you can see, though, on the left-hand side that many agencies actually didn't have a whole lot of Section 508 original errors, right? Because they sort of got that under control. And they're going to get the WCAG 2 errors under control, too, over time. When they come to learn what they are and what the requirements are, they're going to get those under control too. But this is just a sort of a quick view of what that was like. And so I don't really want to go into this. I want to go to...
Actually, Katie, may I ask if this will be available? Can we distribute this so people can look at all the rich data that was collected?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah.
Can I jump in really quick?
Please
Because
do.
I love, that's a terrible way to say it. Oftentimes, we see that some of the accessibility errors are things like alternative text, right? Things that are fairly simple to solve, but really take the human intervention.
Yeah.
And when we come to this idea, like Dominic said, of how are we using innovation? How are we pushing the boundaries using things like machine learning and artificial intelligence? I think one takeaway, or how is this happening today, is that within the Microsoft Office products, we now are using artificial intelligence to provide automatic alt texts automatically. You put in a picture in PowerPoint, it provides already a description. Now, you might want to go in there and change it, right, and make it more specific, but that's the power of innovation. That's the power of using the accessibility lens to push what we all need and want. So I love that it continues to be a problem, and we really can use innovation to start solving for it.
I totally agree.
You know, Megan, I really tried to trip up that Office AI algorithm for the alt,
thanks,
and
Deque.
I did not succeed. It is fantastic. I mean, and I'm pretty good at tripping up things, you know, but it did not work. So it's really fantastic. If for those of you who have not seen it, really worth seeing. And back to you, Katie, because, you know, so the data that you, just to make sure I understood what you were saying, and I come up with the great ideas. I said, oh, let's do the survey, but Katie did all the hard work. So you're saying that from the section 508 to the section, what is the right terminology, Bruce?
Revised.
To the revised, yes, from the
revised
original
508
standards to the revised 508 standards, I got it. The number of defects that you found were 3 times for the refresh. And is that correlated to the change in requirements? How many new requirements are there in the new, revised?
As we would have had in here, based on something from the Access Board, their comparison table. Well, we know that there's 16 completely new requirements that I'll show in just a minute. And there are others that are substantially new. But the point of the matter is what we did, and we all know this, who was using Section 5 before, is we got creative as to how we applied the standards, right? We used 22, which is for the web, and 21, which is for software, and used both of them for the web, as well as using from 24, the multimedia components, as well as using 31, which was the functional performance criteria. Well, the new standard says you don't do it that way. You're not going to, because we tried to cover everything appropriately through WCAG. So you don't additionally add the functional performance criteria with this new standard. It's either or, and they made it very clear. It wasn't clear last time, and so we did everything we could do to modernize it, and it's fine. But now we have a standard that's going to help us be able to utilize what we need to utilize. So one of the things that I want to point out here is, and I have to stand up for some reason. Can I take the...
Yeah, sure.
So training is what we learned from this information, and is that training is important. And you're going to need to work on these new requirements and teach people about them. The biggest problem that showed up in a lot of the testing that we did with ACTS is ARIA misuse. So ARIA is a great tool, language, to improve the accessibility of web components, websites. But it really needs to be understood well. And so in the absence of understanding well, follow the first rule of ARIA, which is don't use it. Use HTML5 and its semantic elements designed for accessibility first. And when your team understands how to use ARIA correctly, then go ahead and start implementing ARIA. Don't just start throwing it out there because you can make things a real mess. For people who use assistive technology. So I just want to point that out because a lot of those errors came up. This is important information. So get your team trained on what these new requirements are and how they can go about learning them. Our company provides training. W3C has awesome resources with code snippets and things like that on how to build an accessible carousel. There's tutorials at W3C. There's all kinds of things, but your teams need to learn, your designers need to learn, especially about the color contrast requirements and the other components that are appropriate to design, and your developers need to learn about development. Our company is and I work for Deque, is really about auditing, and it's about testing for that very minimum set, right? But we have training materials that talk about not just the minimum set, but much higher for what are the best practices and what are the multiple ways that you can make something work. So that's really the number one thing. So you want to prepare for increased workload in auditing, validating, and remediating. And I don't think people should be scared by that. Again, when WCAG first came out, WCAG 1, which is the basis for the Section 508 standards, the old ones, the original, everyone was, thought it was a really hard and complicated thing to do. This is going to seem, it's just new, that's all. It's new just like anything else, and eventually websites are going to be able to comply. It just takes time. So just give patience and be realistic about the learning curve that your staff needs. Developers should anticipate 3 times the number of defects and allocate appropriate time to remediate. And that can be improved greatly by using tools during development that test for accessibility errors that developers have control over. And there are tools out there, and that's something you should be looking at. So before they ever get to QA, before they ever get out the door, they're handled in development. So that's an important point. In-flight projects, obviously, flight projects, I mean, we've been saying this for, first of all, Bruce and I have been saying under equivalent facilitation, you could be using WCAG 2 today. You could have been using it 5 years ago, 7 years ago. For the last 2 years or so, we've been recommending go ahead and use WCAG 2 today, because equivalent facilitation says if you can find a better way to meet these requirements, please do. You know, and that's what WCAG 2 is. So anyway, anything that's going to be delivered after the 18th of January should already be expected to comply with the WCAG 2 standard, and should be using the new VPAT or whatever Robert's calling it, Accessibility Conformance Report. And then the other thing, which most of you probably have heard of, this thing called Safe Harbor. Well, Safe Harbor is just it's used in other contexts like privacy and things like that. It's a way to protect you for the situations you have right now. And I want you to think about, if you have a website that you do not ever intend to update, but people use on a regular basis. Yes, that's the point I'm making. If you have a site that's already, then you want to look at verifying in some way before the 18th that you comply with today's standard. Because if you do, then you don't need to update that site unless or until you add a new component. So if you have a site that you know, we're just not going to rebuild that, we don't have time, it doesn't matter, we're already working on an update that's coming out 6 months from now, don't update it, but make sure that you validate before the 18th of January that it is compliant with today's standard and you're good to go. If you do add any component to it, then that component needs to meet WCAG 2. So you add a calendar's going to have to meet WCAG 2. So I'm just saying, this is something that the Access Board built in to make this a realistic transition. Everybody doesn't have to jump and tomorrow everything has to be perfectly done, that some people are concerned about. And so I want you to realize that this is there, and it's there for a reason. You know, we're all going in the right direction. We shouldn't expect to all be there on February 1st.
Thank you, Katie. And of course, by the way, it's a real privilege to have an expert like Katie on the DQ team. She brings such a wealth of experience. So thank you. Yeah, Katie, that's great.